Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
My 1989 experimental discovery of how and why parallel processing makes computers faster and makes supercomputers fastest occurred at the frontier of knowledge about the massively parallel processing supercomputer. That experimental discovery of the massively parallel processing supercomputer that occurred on the 4th of July 1989 in Los Alamos, New Mexico, United States, led me to discover that creating a new technology creates a need for a new vocabulary and a new narrative for the histories of science and technology. After my experimental discovery of the high-performance supercomputer, I became like the ancient mariner that traveled around the world to tell his story to different people. Since 1989, school children are asked to do a school report on the contributions of Philip Emeagwali to the development of the computer, of the supercomputer. Back in 1989, it made the news headlines that a lone wolf African supercomputer wizard that worked alone for 16 years across supercomputer laboratories in the United States has experimentally discovered the massively parallel processing supercomputer and has discovered how to parallel compute many things or processes at once instead of computing only one thing at a time. Those newspaper articles wrote that his discovery of the high-performance supercomputer will have rich, fertile, and far-reaching consequences. That African supercomputer wizard experimentally discovered how to always perform the fastest supercomputer calculations and how to perform them by computing many things or processes at once instead of computing only one thing at a time. I, Philip Emeagwali, was that African supercomputer scientist that was in the news back in 1989. I was in the news because I experimentally discovered that the fastest speeds in supercomputing can always be recorded with massively parallel processing technology. That technology enabled me to massively compute 65,536 things at once, or in parallel at as many processors. My experimental discovery that parallel processing is the engine that drives the computer to compute faster and drives the supercomputer to compute fastest made the news headlines onwards of 1989. My experimental discovery was widely recorded from supercomputer publications to the June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal, and that discovery remains the most talked about experimental discovery in the history of computing. My experimental discovery made the news headlines because I experimentally discovered the fastest computation and I discovered the technique across the slowest 65,536 tightly coupled processors that are commonly available in the market. My experimental discovery of the high-performance supercomputer made the news headlines because I discovered parallel processing, and I discovered it when everybody rejected parallel processing. I experimentally discovered parallel processing, and I discovered the technology as a lone wolf supercomputer programmer. I experimentally discovered the fastest computation, and I discovered the technique by harnessing the total computing power of a parallel processing machine that was powered by an ensemble of the slowest 65,536 tightly coupled processors in the world. I experimentally discovered the fastest computation that could be recorded with parallel processing technology. I experimentally discovered the fastest supercomputer, and I discovered the technology when the supercomputer textbooks and the leaders of thought in supercomputing predicted that parallel processing will not work within the high-performance supercomputer. I experimentally discovered the massively parallel processing supercomputer, and I discovered the technology when computational physicists warned that it will forever be impossible to compute many things or process many processes at once. When I experimentally discovered the high-performance supercomputer, the 25,000 vector processing supercomputer scientists in the world that were led by Seymour Cray believed that parallel processing will forever remain a huge waste of everybody's time. I experimentally discovered how to harness the high-performance supercomputer that computes with 1 million or more processors that were already available in the market, and how to harness those processors to massively parallel process, and how to harness the fastest parallel processing supercomputer to solve the toughest problems arising in computational physics, such as when solving the initial boundary value problems arising in calculus, science, and engineering. I experimentally discovered how to harness parallel processing and harness the technology to solve the most extreme scale problems arising in modern algebra. I experimentally discovered how to harness the high-performance supercomputer and harness it to solve the toughest problems arising in extreme scale computational physics. That experimental discovery was critical to solving the most vexing grand challenge problems arising in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I experimentally discovered how to harness parallel processing and harness the technology to solve the computation-intensive problem that is described as petroleum reservoir simulation, and that was classified by the United States government as one of the 20 most vexing grand challenges in supercomputing. My experimental discovery of how to compute many things or process many processes at once, and how to compute simultaneously, while solving the most computation-intensive problems arising in extreme-scale computational physics, made the news headlines because I was an unknown black sub-Saharan African supercomputer scientist that challenged the most well-known and well-regarded supercomputer scientists of the 1970s and 80s. Those leading lights of computing and supercomputing, namely the likes of Steve Jobs, Seymour Cray, and Gene Amdahl, warned that parallel processing will forever remain impossible. I was warned that I will never discover the massively parallel processing supercomputer. I was warned that I will never record the fastest speeds in computation and record those speeds across my ensemble of the slowest 65,536 tightly coupled processors in the world. But on the 4th of July 1989, I discovered that the toughest problems arising in extreme-scaled computational physics that were believed to be impossible to solve on only one processor are in fact possible to solve across a massively parallel processing supercomputer that was powered by a global network of the slowest 65,536 processors that were already available in the market, and that is a new internet de facto. I experimentally discovered how to solve the toughest problems arising in supercomputing and how to solve those problems across my new global network of processors that I named a primordial internet and that I visualized as a small copy of the internet. I visualized that new internet as a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors that I could harness to both communicate synchronously and to compute simultaneously, and to solve 65,536 problems, and to solve them with a one-to-one correspondence between problems and processors. I experimentally discovered how to massively parallel process and how to compute across my new global network of 64 binary thousand processors that is a new internet. I discovered parallel processing, and I discovered the technology when it was written in all supercomputer textbooks that it will forever remain impossible to theoretically discover how to parallel process and to discover how to parallel compute across 8 processors. In the 1980s, I theoretically and experimentally discovered that my new internet is a new supercomputer and a new computer de facto. The African-American poet Maury Evans said, "Speak the truth to the people." My scientific truth was controversial in the 1970s and 80s. In those 2 decades, I was banished from the community of 25,000 vector processing supercomputer scientists. I was forced to parallel program abandoned massively parallel processing supercomputers and forced to parallel program their processors as a lone wolf.
insightful and brilliant lecture.